Hello and welcome to Docual. My name is Andrew, and as always, if you like the video, please consider liking and subscribing for more content like this. Today, we will be covering the heinous crimes of Stephen Griffiths. Now, before we get into the rest of the video, it is important to note that we will be referring to Griffiths by name only. Many killers gain nicknames, usually to do with their crimes. Jack the Ripper, the Boston Strangler, and the Night Stalker, to name some of the more well-known. These nicknames are normally penned by the tabloid media outlets of their time. This case is no different, as he was penned the Crossbow Cannibal. However, Stephen was proud of his nickname and called himself it. He wishes to be known by it to this day, as he wanted to become one of the famous killers he admired. As such, we refuse to call him that. Now, with that preface out of the way, let's get started. Stephen Sean Griffiths was born in Dewsbury, West Riding of Yorkshire, on December 24th, 1969, to parents Stephen and Moira. Stephen had two siblings, Caroline, born in 1972, and Philip, born in 1976. In 1982, when Stephen was aged 13, his parents divorced. Stephen and his siblings went to live with their mother. During this time, it has been reported that Moira would frequently have sex with men outside in their back garden, with Stephen being able to watch from his window. It has been suggested that this is an experience that might have led to Stephen's hatred of women and sex workers. In the same year, Stephen started attending Queen Elizabeth Grammar School in West Yorkshire. Just a little fun fact about Queen Elizabeth Grammar School: its previous alumni also includes the notorious acid bath murderer John Haig, who was responsible for at least 6 murders and had previously been hanged in 1949. During his time at school, Stephen was known as a bit of an oddball by his peers and a bit of a nutter. Another recalled he would bring in a briefcase to school which would hold a knife and martial arts magazines. At age 17, Stephen began shoplifting regularly. Now, sources do differ slightly, but around this time, he was caught by either a manager or a security guard, to whom Stephen pulled out a knife and slashed him across the face and neck. He would be arrested and sentenced to 3 years in youth custody. However, he would only serve 1 year and would be released. While serving his sentence, fellow inmates and officers have since reported that Stephen claimed he aspired to be a serial killer, but apparently nobody that heard this took him seriously. After his release, he cut ties with his family entirely. He was given a flat and moved to Manningham. In September 1989, Stephen was brought before Bradford Court and charged with possession of an air pistol. He was sentenced to 100 hours of community service. In 1991, Stephen was sentenced to 2 years in prison after holding a knife to a young woman's throat. During his sentence, he was sent to Rampton Hospital, a high-security psychiatric hospital, where he was diagnosed to be a sadistic, schizoid psychopath and to also have a personality disorder. Medical staff noted that Stephen had violent fantasies and had a specific fascination with the violent murders of victims. Stephen was released from jail in 1993. In 1996, he moved into a 1-bedroom flat in Homefield Court, Bradford, which is on the edge of Bradford's red light district. In 1997, he began his Bachelor of Science degree in psychology at Leeds University. In 1998, he started dating Zita Pinder. They dated for 2 years, during which time Stephen lied about where he was living, stating he lived with his parents. He would stay with her 3 or 4 times per week and would plug his ears with cotton wool at night, as he feared insects or spiders would crawl inside. Eventually, she did find out where his flat was and was invited over. Zita gives us the first description of Stephen's flat, stating this: "His flat was horrific and very macabre, very scary. You walked in, and on the left-hand side, there was a huge bookcase full of books on the likes of the Moors murders, and Jack the Ripper, and the Yorkshire Ripper. He had lots of really horrific video nasties. The flat was absolutely spotless, but everything was covered in plastic. He said it was because it was new furniture, and he didn't want to get it damaged. Even his carpet had plastic on it. Most places in his flat were covered. He was obsessive. You had to take your shoes off. If he made a drink, you had to have it on a mat. I got a feeling where I didn't feel safe, so I made an excuse. Zita ended the relationship, and shortly afterwards, Stephen got into another relationship with a woman named Kathy Hancock, which by all accounts was quite abusive. Kathy wasn't allowed to go outside without him, and while they were out together, she was terrified of looking at anyone in case Stephen reacted with jealousy. In one instance, Kathy reported that she had been punched by Stephen for going out to a nightclub with his sister. Kathy planned to leave Stephen, but then discovered she was pregnant. A few months later, she lost the baby, and bravely gathered the courage to leave Stephen in 2001. In the years following their breakup, Kathy was subjected to threatening voicemails and emails, with Stephen even slashing her tires and writing offensive graffiti on her wall when she wasn't home. Kathy attempted to get a non-molestation order put against Stephen, but this was unfortunately not successful. So even more bizarrely, after their relationship ended, Stephen started a collection of lizards, which he would walk around his town in a lead and bring them into nightclubs in his backpack, apparently as an attempt to get people to talk to him. Starting in 2001, Stephen began self-destructive behaviours. This included drinking heavily, taking cocaine and amphetamines, as well as downloading violent pornography. In 2003, Stephen earned his degree in psychology, and then in 2004 began his doctorate in psychology. During this time and the foreseeable future, he was able to live off the grants he received, as Stephen never actually went into employment. In 2009, Stephen received a conviction for harassment, for which he received a conditional discharge. In many ways, this sentence reflects the lack of punishments that Stephen had received his entire life for the crimes that he had committed thus far. Hindsight is of course 2020, but perhaps if his previous crimes had been taken more seriously by the law, perhaps if he was given the mental health treatment that he clearly needed at this stage, perhaps what would transpire next may not have happened. But unfortunately, it did happen, and it demonstrates the depraved nature of Stephen Griffiths. Susan Rushworth was born in 1966. Her brother Paul recalls them both having a happy childhood in the countryside. Susan got married in her early 20s, having children, after which they separated, but she was able to find love again and continued growing her family. However, this relationship also would end, and the next man who came into her life would not be a good influence on her. At 35, Susan would be introduced to heroin. She engaged in sex work to fund her addiction. After a while, her mother Christine paid for rehab, after which Susan was drug-free for a few months. By 2009, Susan was the mother of 3 and a grandmother. On Monday the 22nd of June 2009, Susan leaves her mother's house, bringing her mobile phone with her, telling her mother she'll be gone for a few hours. She goes to her local chemist and collects her methadone, a medication used to help reduce the withdrawal symptoms experienced. When her mother calls her later, Susan does not answer, which is unusual because despite Susan's lifestyle, she always kept in contact with her mother, who in turn calls the police to report her missing. Missing posters go up and TV appeals are made by Susan's family. The police interview the most obvious suspects, local drug dealers, and known men who visit the local sex workers. The police comb through the woodland and drain a local lake, but there is no sign of Susan. Her bank cards have not been used since she disappeared. her brother Paul began his own investigation by speaking to the other local sex workers, one of whom was a woman named Shelley Armitage, who unfortunately we will be speaking about a little bit later. Susan's whereabouts were unknown to everyone, that is, except for Stephen Griffiths, who selfishly has refused to this day to give any information regarding the location of Susan's remains or how he came to meet Susan the day he killed her. All we do know is that Stephen admitted to killing her with a hammer strike to the head. DNA evidence that would be later found in Griffith's oven goes on to suggest that after killing Susan, he also cooked and ate part of her. Shelley Armitage was born in 1979. She was described as a bubbly girl who attended Catholic school when she was younger. Growing up, she aspired to become a model who could travel the world. Unfortunately, when Shelley was 16, she was introduced to heroin and quickly became addicted. By age 31, she regularly carried out sex work to fund her and her boyfriend Craig's addiction. On the afternoon of April 26, 2010, Shelley bumped into her mother and father out shopping, where they unknowingly had the last conversation with their daughter. Later on that evening, Shelley would be seen for the last time talking into the window of a car. When Shelley didn't return to her boyfriend that evening, Craig contacted the police. After disappearing, Shelley missed 2 court appearances, did not use her mobile phone, and did not claim any of her benefits. In the hopes of finding Shelley, the police released CCTV footage of Shelley in the hopes that someone might recognize and identify her. On May 25, 2010, police divers found various body parts in various parts around the city. Like Susan Rushworth, DNA evidence would also be found in Griffith's oven, indicating that parts of her had been eaten also. Additionally, video footage would be recovered showing a nude Shelley tied up in Griffith's bathtub. The words "my sex slave" drawn on her back. So little of Shelley would be recovered that her family would bury her remains in a child's coffin. Suzanne Blamires was born in 1974 in Bradford. During her teenage years, she was known as an attractive, confident, and cheeky young girl. She began training as a nurse. During this time, she liked to attend raves. It was at these that she was first introduced to recreational drugs. By the time that she was 21, she had been introduced to heroin. By the age of 25, she would be carrying out sex work to fund her addiction. When Suzanne's mum, Nikki, grew suspicious, Suzanne would confess everything to her, but would not stop. On May 21st, 2010, Nikki dropped Suzanne off at her flat. It was routine that Suzanne would ring her mum every night. However, when Nikki didn't get any calls from her daughter, she thought it was strange. On the 22nd of May, around 4 p.m, Suzanne's boyfriend Greg arrived at Nikki's house, asking if she had seen Suzanne. Knowing something was wrong, Nikki contacted the police. On the 25th of May, a walker spotted a sports bag in the River Aire. He managed to fish it out. Upon looking inside, he made the grisly discovery of a woman's head and other body parts that had been skinned and had a crossbow bolt and a knife embedded in the skull. Nearby, a second bag was found containing hacksaws and other tools used to dismember bodies. The remains inside the bag would later be identified as Suzanne Blamires. It would be the murder of Suzanne that would lead to the arrest of Stephen Griffiths. On the 24th of May 2010, 3 days after Suzanne Blamires' disappearance, the caretaker of Homefield Court reviewed the CCTV footage of the property. He did this routinely to monitor petty crimes, which were fairly common. He was fast forwarding through the tape of Stephen's floor when he saw him bringing a woman into his flat. Minutes later, the woman was seen fleeing from Stephen's flat, with Stephen following behind, holding a crossbow. Stephen is seen firing, missing, reloading, and firing again, striking her in the head. He turns to the CCTV camera and raises his crossbow as if it was a trophy. He drags the woman's lifeless body into his flat. He then returns to the camera, holding a drink, flipping the camera off in a seemingly act of triumph. A while later, he is seen dragging bin bags and a rucksack out of his flat. After seeing this, the caretaker understandably phones the police. Soon, armed police arrive to arrest Stephen. The woman in the CCTV footage is determined to be Suzanne Blamires, her final terrifying moments being captured on film. Police searched his flat, finding 2 crossbows and bolts, along with a bookcase full of books about serial killers he idolized. Additionally, the flat looked like he had ripped up carpets and tiles in an attempt to get rid of evidence. In addition to finding the video depicting Shelley's death and dismemberment, they would also find a camera on which each woman had been photographed dead on his bed. These are considered to be his trophies. On the 28th of May 2010, Stephen had his first court appearance at his pre-trial hearing regarding this case. When magistrates asked for his name, Stephen replied that he was the crossbow cannibal, a name given to him a day before by a tabloid newspaper. It is generally accepted that this was an attempt to gain notoriety, as he wanted to become as well known as the killers he read about and admired. On the 21st of December 2010, days before his 41st birthday, Griffiths arrived to court in a grey tracksuit. He was described as showing disdain and complete contempt during the whole trial. As the trial proceeded, Stephen's legal team attempted to argue that his 20-year-old diagnosis of sadistic schizoid psychopathy should be taken into account, which brought into question whether Stephen could stand trial at all. The judge confirmed that Stephen's mental health had been evaluated, confirming that he was fit to stand trial. The judge's ruling was upheld. After only 2 hours and 20 minutes, the trial was over, with Griffiths pleading guilty to all charges, for which he received 3 life sentences with no possibility of parole. Thank you very much for watching. I hope to see you next time for some more true crime. Bye for now.